Hey everybody, Ray Flip, television beat writer for Bleeding Cool. Welcome you back once again to our weekly recap of The Walking Dead Season 8. We're going to be taking a look at our review of Episode 13, Do Not Send Us Astray. Now, those of you who saw last week's review, you know that the key I thought was a really, really great return to form for the series. It just really just hit on a lot of cylinders. Now, a lot of it had to do with that summer action movie vibe, because you can't go wrong when you got Rick and Negan taking on each other and you throw in a flaming bat and it just gets kind of interesting. So my concern about this episode was, are they going to be able to follow up, or are we going to have a little bit of a letdown like we had earlier in the season? I am happy to report it's a really, really good, solid, strong follow-up. As good as last week's, no, and I'm going to talk about a couple key points as I go through the review, but a really strong episode for one basic but strong reason. It reminded us that it's a horror show. The scene, and I'll talk about it in a minute, but the moment where we see what's going on in the Hilltop in the middle of the night amongst the sick and wounded, it disturbed me on a whole lot of levels. So, again, from that aspect, I felt like last week we got reminded, you know what, this is also an action show. This week we got reminded it's an action show, but guess what, folks? We're still talking zombies, we're talking walkers, we're talking, The Walking Dead, we are talking horror. So I was really, really happy with that. So again, going to go real quick into some key points that I liked and didn't like, and then I'll let you know what my overall review is. First thing, we start off, and what's got me intrigued, and I'm curious to see where this fits in to his crossover with Fear the Walking Dead. We see Morgan as being haunted by Gavin. And I'm looking over because I want to make sure that I get the quote right. You know what it is, you know. Gavin keeps haunting him throughout the episode with that line over and over again. Now, little flash ahead for next week's episode in the previews, we see that next week a good chunk of the episode is going to be Rick and Morgan together. So I'm wondering if it isn't somehow tied into that. But that right off the bat I thought really set kind of an eerie tone, and we don't get an answer. We just get that periodically throughout the episode. So I thought that was really, really effective. The other thing I really liked in the beginning of the episode, and the build-in to the confrontation with Simon and, double-dealing Dwight, was the idea of we got to see the team back together and what the team can do when you give them... They're like the big A-team. You give them some sticks, some dirt, and some paper clips, they're going to come up with a nuclear bomb. And I love it, because you had Simon, who's gone off the rails, who's going total scorched earth. We see Simon, the psycho leader, is nothing compared to Maggie as the skilled leader. Maggie, we know, never had any intention to kill all 38 saviors. She knew, and she played it exactly how it was going to play. Simon needed to say from his own lips that he didn't give a damn about those saviors and they could all die, which means Maggie was going to get, out of that 30-something, was going to get at least half of them to stay on her side, which she does. So we see the standoff. Simon's having the troops go in, everything. It's just so wonderfully orchestrated. Now, it's wonderfully orchestrated with the understanding that nobody on the Hilltop side knows about the weapons yet and how they're tainted with walker blood. So we're going to get kind of, I guess, the punchline to all this later on. What I really loved about this episode is it's one of those things where you just kind of smile and nod and go, oh, do not send us astray. I completely get what they're saying. Because with Simon and the Saviors, it's a pure representation of what happens when things go off the rails and just don't go right. Again, it's with Daryl and Rick, you had kind of a coming together, and with Daryl saying, look, I'm sorry, I just wanted to end this, I went off the rails. With Simon, we're not getting that. And Simon's making decisions that go against everything that Negan is in favor of. So I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in that confrontation. I have a feeling Dwight, our double-dealing agent, is going to get elevated to second in command very, very soon. And I think it's going to be particularly brutal and ugly. So if we see Stephen Ogg as a guest on Talking Dead anytime soon, I think we pretty much know what's going to be going on. But the fight was just so well orchestrated, so well planned. There was a very interesting scene where Simon and Dwight were going to sneak up on Tara, and Dwight shot Tara in the shoulder, I believe it was, with an arrow. Now, my thinking is that this is a variation of what happened in the comic book, that he shot her with an arrow that wasn't tainted, just to kind of get her off the playing field so Simon wouldn't kill her. That's the prediction I'm going with. Now, it's funny we talk about that because, we talk about that because I think that's also one of the things I have an issue with this season. The Tara, Daryl, Dwight thing, I think, needs to come to a head, and we need to kind of get it taken care of now. I'm not saying Daryl doesn't have reasons to have issues with Dwight. I'm not saying Tara doesn't. It just feels like I feel like Dwight's done a lot at this point to kind of earn at least the whole let's not kill him until all this is settled and done with. Again, I think in that aspect, it's getting. I like to see less of it, and then let's resolve it when they're all back together. A lot of time spent on it when the three of them aren't in the same vicinity. Just to me, it drags a little bit away from the episode. I love the dynamic of Simon being Maggie's Negan, and now I love the combination, and I should say the juxtaposition of Maggie and Rick really working well together, even though we see a little change in their philosophies coming around, as opposed to Negan and Simon, who Simon wants nothing to do with Negan and is basically willing to cut his throat in a second. So I love that contrast in styles. But the Maggie-Rick thing is going to get very interesting, because Rick is still, I think, kind of on this bloodbath path. He isn't buying into the Carl way yet. Maggie is the true representation of the leadership tug-of-war between being the ultra badass and the sacrifices that need to be made, but keeping an eye on the prize for what's going to happen afterwards. And there's that scene at the end when she's looking at the graves and says, when asked about why she's feeling the way she is, and she goes, the cost. And you see Rick walk away, and the sense I got from that, my initial sense was like, geez, Rick, just because she... But I feel like these things are starting to encroach on Rick more and more. I think that's the reason why he didn't want to have that conversation with Sadiq. Just he wasn't in that place yet to talk on that kind of grandiose existential level. It just bothers me because Rick didn't get that damn wound clean. So that's the one thing I do have issue with. So I hope that doesn't come into play. The other thing I want to talk about is Henry and the Saviors. Again, first off, we need to take Carol. Carol does not get a daycare center. I don't think she should be around kids in any way, shape, or form. I'm not even saying this is her fault. It just seems like every time Carol gets in some long-term contact with a kid, the kid dies, goes psycho, or screws up, or some combination of all three. Well, Henry screwed up. So Henry decides to get a gun. He decides to go confronting the Saviors. He wants to find out which of them really killed his brother. He unlocks the door. Guess what happens? Jerry ends up getting his hands on the gun. The Saviors escape. Now, thankfully, Alvin turns out to actually be a pretty decent guy. And we see towards the end of the episode that Alvin, I'd say probably, maybe again, about half the Saviors have stayed and are trying to fortify the gates and to keep the walkers out. And it's that understanding of like, look, people have to make choices. And it's like Tara said earlier in the episode, they don't hold Tara guilty anymore for the fact that she sided with the governor. It's this idea of times and situations. If people are willing to adjust and change, you have to give them that chance and that opportunity. And I think that kind of played out bigger to what I'm hoping we're going to see go on with the Tara, Daryl, and Dwight situation. So, yeah, the Henry thing. The best part that Henry did, I felt in this episode, was disappear. So I think he's becoming one of those... I'm going to write a piece one day about how The Walking Dead's done a great job of killing off characters that have annoyed me for the most part, but that's a completely side issue. I'm looking over here, by the way, I'm going down my list. Carol and Tobin. Tobin is the construction worker who kind of gave up, who acquiesced his leadership to Abraham way back yonder before Abraham had, when Abraham still had a full head. I know there was supposed to be a big emotional impact. I love that it brought more of Carol out, because I think Melissa McBride is just a fantastic actress, and any chance she gets to kind of dig deep into the well of Carol, I think that's awesome. But Tobin, again, I thought he was more effective when he died, which is now what I'm going to get to. The best part of this entire episode was what happened after the fight. When the ramifications of the wounds started to kick in, Tobin was one of those. But it was just the way it was so quietly filmed. It reminded me very Night of the Living Dead-ish, where it was somebody turns, somebody bit somebody else. You have this horrific scene of walkers stumbling upon these people in the main floor that are either sleeping, wounded, or both, almost essentially like a buffet for them. And it just becomes this huge melee. We see the scene with Henry and the Saviors, and we see the screaming and the blood-curdling screaming, and they cut back, and it's just horrific. And I loved it. From the moment Tobin turned to the moment it got quieted down, it reminded me that the show is still a horror show. That it is not action. It is not just drama. That is not even soap opera. It is not, This Is Us post-zombie apocalypse. But this is really a horror show. And I felt like they reminded us of that last night. The effects crew, the directing, the tone, and everything else, those scenes were amazing. And I just thought, again, harken back to the really great, disturbing episodes. And of which, to be honest with you, I don't think there were many. This whole segment of time, I actually felt myself nervous. Like Rick, Negan fighting each other type of nervous, but more, holy crap, I couldn't even imagine what it would be like sleeping on that floor knowing that 3 walkers are coming at me. That kind of creepy. So I loved it. I also loved it because it gave us an opportunity towards the end of the episode to see the gang, to get the crew back together. It was nice to see, Rick and Daryl and Carol and Michonne and Tara and Rosita and all like the main crew, the hard-hitting crew, just kind of getting together, like, look, this is the deal. This is what's going on. Rick's breaking down to them what it was he noticed from Negan's bat and how they're now waging biological warfare. It was one of those moments where it was nice when you saw Georgie last week because it gave you hope, and then you saw them together this week. You're thinking, okay, we're getting towards the end of the season. The crew's getting back together. They fathomed a huge wave of onslaught from the Saviors and took it and sent them packing with their tail between their legs. So it gave you some hope. So again, I think a very good, solid episode. I would put it around a 7 to 7.5. Maybe, you know what? Let's say a 7.25. I'm gonna go 7.25. I will give this episode 7.25 John Cusacks. Really good, strong, solid episode. Last week was a tough follow-up, and they did a very respectable job of it. So very impressed, very happy about that. Thank you guys for joining me. Again, my name is Ray Flick, television beat writer for Bleeding Cool. This is the Walking Dead weekly recaps that we do and reviews. We are going to be back here Sunday for our live blog. It will be a live blog. I don't care what kind of backups I have to do. We've been having a little problem with our live blog company lately. Side note, show you what goes on behind the curtains. But we will be up and steady running and good to go on Sunday again. And we will also be back with our review on Monday morning, similar to what we're doing now. So again, my name is Ray. Thanks for joining me. We'll be back on Sunday for, I think, is the 14th episode. Still Gotta Mean Something. I have a feeling we're going to get some very, very big Morgan-specific stuff. And, sneak preview, we're also going to see what the hell's going on between Jadis and Negan. Thank you guys for joining me. Enjoy your Monday. Enjoy the rest of your week. See you on bleedingcool.com.